Spoiler culture is more rampant than ever, so much so that audiences can end up going into movies expecting to see very specific reveals and scenes that just seem nailed on to happen. And sometimes they're bang on the money, and an anticipated moment does end up in the eventual film. But other times, the things that we expected to see end up not appearing at all. With this in mind, today we're talking about the recent movie moments everyone was waiting for. First up, an appearance by Taylor Swift, Deadpool and Wolverine. Everyone knew that Deadpool and Wolverine was going to be stacked with huge cameos from start to finish. Even before entering the MCU, Deadpool 2 managed to bring the entire X-Men team together, even if it was just for a split second. And with the Fox universe and the MCU to draw from, the third in the trilogy had an embarrassment of riches at its fingertips. That being said, however, there was one rumored appearance that everyone was waiting for that ultimately didn't happen, namely the appearance of one Taylor Swift. This was a theory that the internet grabbed onto and just ran with, until it felt almost certain that the biggest pop star in the world would show her face in this flick. There have been rumors for a long time surrounding Taylor Swift joining a Marvel film in some capacity, in particular to play Dazzler. And with her being real-life friends with Ryan Reynolds and wife Blake Lively, paired with the shirt that Wade wore in Deadpool 2 that actually featured Swift's cats, it seemed like a sure thing. Add to the equation the first footage of Ladypool from the trailers, and there could be no question, right? Well, the female Deadpool was ultimately portrayed by Lively herself, and director Shawn Levy has since confirmed that there was never even a single conversation had about bringing the megastar on board. Well, there's always next time. Next up, the death of Ethan Hunt, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Now, as soon as you put the word final into the title of a film in a franchise that has run for as long as Mission Impossible has, it's hard to not think about a permanent end. Particularly with someone like Ethan Hunt, who has been dicing with death from the very beginning of this franchise. The marketing for the latest Mission Impossible backed this up as well, really driving home that this was the end of Hunt's story. And with the character himself asking to be trusted one last time in the trailer, it was hard to not picture this as the end of Tom Cruise's legendary IMF agent. Relatively early on in the film, the decision was made to kill off Ving Rhames' Luther, but even this didn't mean necessarily that Ethan wouldn't also suffer the same fate as well. Again, it must have been called The Final Reckoning for a reason, right? And if No Time to Die can kill off James Bond in an onslaught of missiles, why not Ethan Hunt? So, when Hunt was flying through the sky fighting with Gabriel, and when he soared through the air on a parachute that ultimately set on fire, it seemed as though there would be no way that this character would survive. But there he was after landing, walking across the field like he had just travelled by car, rather than literally falling through the sky. And hey, if this means the door is still open for more Mission Impossibles at some time in the future, I'm a fan of it. Next up, Batman's cameo, Superman. James Gunn's Superman was a real statement of intent for the new wave of DC films to come. Despite worries that it was biting off a little more than it could chew by reintroducing not just the likes of Superman, Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, but also introducing an assortment of other heroes like the Lanterns, Mr. Terrific and Hawkgirl, at least on the big screen anyway, it effortlessly weaved in the wider DC world without losing focus on the Man of Steel himself. One character who was missing, however, was the Dark Knight. Expectation that we'd get our first glimpse of Batman in this movie started to reach a fever pitch in the weeks leading up to release, with some corners of the internet expecting a nod to Andy Muschietti's upcoming DCU Batman film, The Brave and the Bold, while others even hypothesized and started to be convinced that Superman would instead roll Matt Reeves's and Robert Pattinson's The Batman universe into Gunn's directly. That latter theory reached new highs of confirmation bias as well, with the release of the official soundtrack extremely close to launch, and one track in particular that did admittedly have more than a few similarities to the main theme in The Batman. However, not only did this universe-colliding merger not happen, but Batman wasn't directly referenced at all in the finished product. We'll have to wait a little longer before we get that glimpse. Next up, Caesar's Descendant, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Did anyone really expect the Planet of the Apes franchise to continue after Caesar's death in War for the Planet of the Apes? The trilogy was stronger than anyone could have ever hoped for, and it was unequivocally the story of Andy Serkis's simian character. However, even after his death, the series carried on with the still good Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, with a 300-year gap between this chapter and the rest of the story. Naturally, Caesar was never going to appear himself, but it seemed nailed on that the new protagonist, Noah, would be a descendant of his. As said, this was Caesar's story, and it would have felt remiss not to have some sort of presence of his within the fourth film. That, plus the striking similarities between the two characters, certainly suggested a connection, though ultimately this was not something that came to fruition. Caesar's presence was indeed felt, certainly, though more as a sort of messiah than anything else. There were no direct links explored between the franchise's two lead protagonists, and though it wasn't explicitly stated that they weren't related in the film, the filmmakers have since come out and quashed any lingering theories on the subject. Next up, another big twist, Trap. M. Night Shyamalan has made a career for himself out of big movie twists. Could anyone have known that Malcolm Crowe had been dead the whole time in The Sixth Sense, that Mr. Glass was truly the villain in Unbreakable, or that Split was a secret sequel to Unbreakable 16 years later? These were all shocking when they came, but to say that his latest effort, Trap, fell on the other end of the twist spectrum would be a wild understatement. Thanks to the film's marketing and how the film itself played out, absolutely nobody was surprised that Josh Hartnett's Cooper was revealed to be the Butcher, the film's villain. But since this was a Shyamalan film, there had to be more, right? I mean, this couldn't be the only twist, seeing as how it wasn't even really a twist, it's just set up for the whole movie, and it was the most expected direction that the plot could have taken. Well, as for further surprises, there was nothing that you can consider a big subversion. Was it surprising that Cooper's wife planted evidence to get him caught in the first place? Yeah, kinda, but this was more a relatively straightforward plot development than a game-changing twist that we were expecting. Trap was a pretty good movie, but it was missing that extra gear to make it truly great. Next up, Ellen Ripley's daughter, Alien Romulus. When Alien Romulus released 45 years after the original Alien, like with many chapters in a franchise coming so long after the original, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to connect the two with a familial link. Given the specific time frame of the film being set in between the events of Alien and Aliens, and with Ellen Ripley's daughter Amanda already having led the Alien Isolation video game, it made sense to think that this was exactly who Kaylee Spenny would have been portraying. Such a tie back to the original is probably the easiest way for a film to try and evoke and take advantage of nostalgia. But Romulus avoided such a tactic, introducing this new character instead as Rain Carradine, a person with absolutely no prior connections to the Alien franchise, and it was refreshing. The film wasn't completely free of fan service, of course, as it arguably went too far in this regard with the posthumous inclusion of Ian Holm as Rook. However, at the very least, it was led by an original character that needed no ties to anyone else to make her relevant and compelling. Speaking tying back to other movies though, next up we have Adam Scott as Ben Parker, Madam Webb. Now for something that everyone was expecting that actually happened. What Sony tried to do with its own shared universe based on its Spider-Man characters was something that was kinda doomed from the beginning. I mean, there's the simple fact that you just cannot have a Spider-Man universe, without a Spider-Man. Though in fairness, it didn't help that the likes of Morbius and Madam Webb were genuinely just terrible films regardless. At least the latter though, the fourth entry in this franchise, tried to tie back to Peter Parker in some way, but it just didn't work. And this came largely in the form of Adam Scott's mystery role. The internet had pretty much figured out that Scott would be playing Ben Parker, Peter's uncle, long before the movie ever came out. And those few who actually got around to seeing the film, yours truly included, didn't have to wait long for it to be confirmed. Just a few minutes into proceedings, Scott's character was referred to directly as Ben Parker. Now, it might not have been on the same level as Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire returning in Spider-Man No Way Home in terms of worst kept secrets, but it certainly would have come to the surprise of pretty much nobody in the audience. After a few more clunky references to Ben's nephew being born and some cringe-worthy teasers about the baby's name, it seems likely that the SSU will end without ever having properly the chance to build on Ben's inclusion, and having seen that film, I'm totally alright with that. Next up, Jim's return 28 years later. After 28 weeks later continued the story of the rage virus-infected UK without referencing any of the previous characters who appeared in 28 days later directly, the eventual news of a true sequel was welcome. When it was announced, 28 years later was billed as the first of a new trilogy, and something that would see the return of Cillian Murphy as Jim. The entire world even thought that they spotted the Oscar winner as a zombie in the trailer, though it turned out literally every single person on this planet was mistaken. Director Danny Boyle soon began to downplay Murphy's role, saying that he wouldn't appear in 28 years later, but would rather make his return in the sequel, The Bone Temple, before enjoying a far chunkier role for the third in the trilogy. Fingers crossed it gets made. However, Andrew Garfield has kind of made it impossible to believe anyone whenever an actor's appearance is denied, either by themselves or the director. And yet, despite our expectations, neither Jim nor Naomi Harris's Selena made an appearance in 28 years, true to Boyle's word. Back to the SSU now with the death of Eddie Brock, Venom: The Last Dance. In a similar way to Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, Venom 3's title, The Last Dance, automatically conjured images of undeniable finality. It felt very much like this was the end for Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock. And this wasn't exactly a theory that was unfounded or baseless. The character's teased entry into the MCU to face off against Tom Holland's Spider-Man was ultimately relegated to a mere post-credits scene before being shipped back home. And with the SSU living on borrowed time, what else was there to do with the character? Well, the entire plot of the third film in the trilogy revolved around Eddie and Venom carrying a codex within themselves that could unlock Null from his prison and bring about the end of the world. The only way to stop this from happening was for either Eddie or Venom to die. Together then, in the finale, they ultimately made the sacrifice to save the world, but at the last moment, Venom spit Eddie out and saved him, sacrificing himself in the process. Yes, one of them had to die, and while everyone thought it would be Eddie Brock, expectations were subverted, and it was instead Venom who danced his last dance. And finally, we're going to talk about the Fantastic Four First Steps, but consider this a spoiler warning considering it is still a very recent movie from this year. Okay, finally, we need to talk about Doctor Doom with the Fantastic Four First Steps. Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom may be taking the reins from Thanos as the MCU's next big bad, but the character has typically been a villain of the Fantastic Four. He is synonymous with Marvel's first family, and in particular Reed Richards, and it felt as though he was always going to make an appearance in their first MCU movie, First Steps. Just the association between the characters made this likely, as Doom has appeared in every Fantastic Four film to date, but this isn't the only reason that an appearance from the man felt essential. After all, Big Bad Thanos didn't just jump straight into Avengers Infinity War in 2018. He was teased throughout the Infinity Saga, and while Marvel Studios has left it late in the game with less than a year to go until Avengers Doomsday, there was always likely to be a little tease of him first, and naturally First Steps felt like the perfect choice. It was always likely going to be in the post-credits scene as well, as Galactus, the villain of First Steps, was commanding of his own story without being drowned out by Doom, and realistically, what else was the film going to tease so close to Doomsday? A quick shot of him speaking to Franklin Richards showing the iconic mask was arguably the most predictable route to go, but honestly, it kind of didn't need to be anything more than that. So that's our list. Let me know if you were expecting any of these movie moments in the comments below, and click another video on screen right now for more content like this.